I would like to recognize the Minister of Local Government and his representative. I would also like to recognize the President of Iaz, Architect Gura. I would also like to recognize my colleagues, maybe not so friendly colleagues, my engineers, my planners, politicians, students, academics, ladies and gentlemen in the built environment. Thank you for inviting me to this auspicious occasion. I'm really glad to be here. Firstly, maybe I should also say Makadini, Sawona, Salwona, Punjani, Moribwanji. So I come from Johannesburg I come from Johannesburg, but I'm originally from Zambia. So to be here is really great because I have taught a number of Zimbabwean architects in 2 different countries. In Zambia, many years ago. I give away my age because I think the past president of IAZ was my student. And also in Johannesburg, there's a lot of Zimbabwean students that I'm working with, and Zimbabwean academics I'm working with. So it's really glad to come to Zimbabwe and have this experience. MC, my totem is elephant, and my colleague there, her totem is fish. Two very different, from Singapore, but fish. But I want to use the elephant in a symbolic way. The elephant in the room. I recognize the presentations by the President and Architect Chiesa from NAS. And in their speeches, which they've mentioned many relevant contextual things, and the fact of the billion population of Africans in the urban context. But in their speeches, there's an elephant gap. And that elephant gap is, I didn't hear landscape architecture being spoken about in their speeches, landscape architecture. Because that is what Edwin and the president of IAZ challenged me to speak about, landscape architecture as a discipline that will contribute to housing, to enabling a resilient billion African population in about 25 years' time, colleagues. It's not far from here, 25 years' time. So I'm happy to see a lot of young people, because colleagues, the young people will contribute to the next generation. They will reproduce. Your children will be in the cities. So, my training is first as an architect, with the assumption when I was 18 years old that I wanted to solve the housing problems of Africa. Not just to study design, but solve African issues. And then when I finished studying architecture, I thought, I don't know anything about the landscape. So I studied landscape architecture. Then I started teaching. I discovered I don't know how to teach. So I did something called a PhD to really understand teaching. And much of what I'm going to say stems from that. And in many ways, continues the dialogue that architect Chiesa, my academic colleague from Nast has been saying. That's my contribution, and that's what I bring colleagues to this forum. Blessing? Okay. Next slide. So the challenge for me was to speak about landscape architecture through public space. Now you will have noted from my colleague, academic, Prof. Chiesa, that he mentioned architecture a number of times and all the other courses in there. In there, and in many other schools, there's no school that speaks about public space. And yet, public space is actually what makes cities. The next cities should really be, if we are to create a vision that is sustainable, equitable, sustainable, should be around public spaces in the city. And so, what I hope to achieve today is to, can somebody else? Please, that's better. Thank you. Give a definition of what I think public space is. And I coin it emergent because I'm thinking about the future. It will be emergent public space. All of you know that in most African cities, not more than 50 years ago, no black people were allowed in the city without a dome pass if you come from South Africa, or a permit. At 6 o'clock, we're all supposed to go home. So African cities were not designed by Africans that we live in. And so I will present a few examples of projects of landscape architects from South Africa. And then I'll also present a bit of my experiment in public space at the Graduate School of Architecture at UG, and also cultivate the idea of landscape architecture and public space as a collaborative discipline, as we've already heard, and also give a short introduction of what landscape architecture is. So public space is not just open space. If the planners in the room, I would like to have a robust discussion about your plans, master plans, and open spaces, and challenge you to really rethink open space. That's open space is not public space. And I'll explain what I mean. Public space is about justice. How? I'll give you a short example. That many street vendors, as soon as they put up their goods there, the next thing that happens is the police will come and move them from the space where they're selling. And yet they see an economic opportunity, and the planner and their regulations say you're not supposed to sell. So that's the problem, and that's how I define public space. Next. What is the state of public space in African cities? That's guided mostly, I'll argue, mostly, and this is just again to provoke the planners and city authorities. We are using, in Africa in general, we use legislation, regulation, which was designed by the colonialists. We haven't rethought it. And please check, I would like somebody who's done a study on that, who's changed the regulation to come and present it. Communities, or public space is run by ad hoc laws and not questioned by planners. Communities request for accommodation of multiple needs, yes, multiple needs communities, In South Africa, we have communities asking for public space where they can do their rituals, the same as here, their rituals. Some of them even bring the cows and goats to the public space to do the rituals. Is that allowed? How is that accommodated? As compared to public space which is used for leisure, walking around, holding hands, and maybe eating an ice cream. That's an ideal that some of us aspire to. But some of us want to connect with our ancestors in the public space. City authorities, most of them, when you speak to them, they want public space that raises revenue. That's what they say. How much money are we going to make out of this? If you can't answer it, next thing you'll find there's a mall there. Leftover space, BRT, bus rapid transport, I'm sure, as Harare goes towards the year 2100, forgive me, I'm confused, American and English, 2100 and 2100. Yeah. Bus rapid transport is going to come. Where is it going to go through? Through the public open space, wetlands, and all the other what they perceive as empty space. What will be left for the people? You have the bus rapid transport, quite all right, but what about the public space? Few cities have strategic public space plans. We've had some in South Africa, metropolitan open space system. It hasn't gone anywhere really, except in a few examples which half the time not successful. Politicians consider parks low on the list of priorities, and the development of parks was seldom placed on political agenda. That's my colleague, a landscape architect, speaking. That we haven't placed public space on the political agenda. I would like to see somebody in a political party saying, our agenda is driven by access to public space for all. Next slide. And so part of my research is to take my students out of the classroom. As you know, the history of South Africa. South Africa was under apartheid, and people were not allowed to travel outside of Africa. So most of my students, when you say Africa, they don't know where it is. So part of my teaching strategy has been to take my students all around Africa. So some of these images I'll go through very quickly, but this is Nairobi, 2024. I was walking through. That's a public space, but it's also a shop. It is also, at the weekend, there's even a church around the ramp that gathers there at the weekend on this bridge. Okay, next one. That's in Gaborone. I took some students to Gaborone, 2023, through the mall, the new part of the mall. I'll show you at the end what the old part of Gaborone. There's a new part which has been designed. It looks like Dubai with public spaces and monuments, huge monuments. You will really be impressed, except I'm questioning it. Okay, next one. Kampala, 2018, where some of my journeys, that's a public space, African public space. It's already filled with activity and people. No architect except the buildings, Paulana or anyone is really looking at that space in the future to say, how do we imagine it and make it work better for people? Because all of that infrastructure there is temporal umbrellas, but they could be designed. Design is what we do. We must do something. Okay, next one. Boysons, ghost stations, infrastructure, opportunities for the future will come by looking at infrastructure that is derelict, no longer in use. The ghost station was used to transport black people out of the city into Soweto and other parts, but now there's no need for that. So some stations have fallen into disrepair. Who has taken them over? the informal settlements and people who are recycling. That needs to be designed for. The station is no longer working. Next one. I also wanted to make reference to the BRT, which I've already done. That BRT in blue is Dar es Salaam, and the one in red is Johannesburg. In there, next to the BRT stations are important public spaces. There's been some attempts to redesign them, in most times not, because public space and the landscape architect comes at the end of the project, not at the beginning. Because the BRT station, it looks nice, but there is no market there. And yet that's where the economic opportunities exist. Okay, next one. Then this project is by a landscape architect, Graham Young, who I worked with as a colleague in the Department of Architecture at University of Pretoria, showing parts of Soweto. And the middle part there was a wetland, Klipstroit River, which was overgrown, and it had to be redesigned because the new government wanted to make public spaces for people. So, move on, next one. So it stemmed from that place which had reeds, which was hiding place for criminals, into this design, which included digging out of the dam. And what has happened over time now, that there's vast amounts of people have stopped moving from Soweto to go to parks, Zoo Lake in the city center, and they are having a nice time within their community. It's possible. And all of these properties which are next to it, the houses, have changed in value, in function, have become nurseries where kids can now have access to green space. It means that changing the landscape means that the market value of the land and opportunities has been opened up by the landscape. Next one. Through public participation. And it included engaging communities with designs on certain parts of the park as we're going along. Okay, next one. And so that's the practical side. The theoretical side, which I've been looking at with a research unit in the Graduate School of Architecture, was to look at the future of landscape architecture. It's within an architecture program, but I run the landscape research. And we are exploring what must be landscape architecture in Africa. And so I want to share this teaching experiment, which has been going on for about 10 years, give a picture of what African landscape concept could be. As landscape architecture is a foreign construct, or maybe not African. It's originally from Europe and America. And if you look carefully, you will find that landscape architecture was done for the kings and queens. And well, after finishing study, I questioned myself, so which kings am I going to design for when I came? I didn't have any kings, but I had a lot of people in informal settlements who I wanted to make the landscape for. And so, education must transform in order to prepare, as architecture says, to prepare the next generation of professionals, and even to upskill the ones that are in practice now. Also, I think my aim is, and that's why I acknowledge the politicians and I challenge them, because the politicians are really very critical. We must have them as part and parcel of part of the process of urbanizing. They're key. If we don't do that, then the project won't be done. Okay, next one. And so the journey of my 15X started off from Soweto. We looked at Soweto wetlands, and then we looked at Kampala wetlands, and then we went to Dar es Salaam with my student, and then we went to Dar es Salaam a second time. Next one. Then COVID hit. That's when we started the abandoned stations. We called it toxic landscape. And then we went from there, we looked at memorials in Gauteng. That was the COVID times. And then soon after they opened, we looked at Gaborone as a site. And after that, we've looked at memory on the margins of South Africa in Thohoyandou, in Venderland, as you would know, or most of you would know that that is an area which was reserved for black people in the apartheid Africa, Venda, as a Bantu stand. So how are the Bantu stands changing in terms of the public space? So that's when our experiment as 15X has been going. So part of that, I won't go into the projects in detail. And next time, Edwin, when you invite me, also give me a stand. How come NAS has a stand outside and they don't have? I really want a stand. I can show my students work. And so in Kampala, we worked on the edges. Colleagues, we're talking about 2050, 2075, with a billion population in the urban areas. Where are they going to go? They're not going to be housed in Harare, the city. They will be housed on the edges of the city, which is where they'll find opportunity, because they'll find cheap accommodation. They'll also have access maybe to a water body, and they can grow some food, and from there they'll start moving up as they find work. That's the process. So that's what we started. So we went into a public space, which was a market, and from there to the other big markets to understand what was going on. They even built their own houses. So that landscape was in a constant flux, impacted by many migrants from all over Africa. And that was the study at Kampala. Next. Then we did the wetlands on the edges of the river in Dar es Salaam, again in informal settlements. And this project was just looking at the possibility of creating, next to the modernist or modern BRT transport station, there were women selling their stuff, fat cooks and all of that. Where do they sell? And where do they take their children for education? Where do they actually go for leisure? It was a site next to the BRT station, but there was no infrastructure for the people there. Okay, next one. So this is the same project by the student, public spaces and leisure spaces next to the BRT station and the river. Next one. Then we looked at landscapes, abandoned train stations around Gauteng to reimagine them. So that's the open space that is possible, because we know who owns the land in the city. So if the local authorities own that land, can the architects, landscape architects, give a vision for that? Give a vision. And that's what was the experiment thing, which included work opportunities, recycling possibilities within the infrastructure of rail, abandoned infrastructure of rail. Let's move on. Then we went to look at memorial sites, to memorialize as one of the greatest human expressions of their life and history. We're always doing that. And here I know there's Heroes Acre. So how do we memorialize? We memorialize by building monuments, yes. And so we were asking with my students, in 2100, how do we remember our history? And it can be dangerous when you say these things, because when you go to the memorials in most of the cities, the memorials speak to the one party which is in power. When you speak to the people, you will find that the real people who are around that monument do not go there. they have their own memorial happening at the same time as the official memorial. So we were looking at examining memorials of public space to be more inclusive, so that the future is more just, represents everyone, it represents the true community about that memorial, okay? And also, to bring in the tradition. As Africans, how do we memorialize? And so when we went to Botswana, we found these three. They're called 3D Hosi monument in the new part of Botswana, which looks like a small city taken out of Dubai, or maybe even China. And they've created a memorial there for the three chiefs, the Dihosis, that went to negotiate with small Queen Elizabeth I to make Botswanaland a protectorate of the British Empire. And these three chiefs, I think it includes Kama and Kama's grandfather or father, and then Batoeng and another one, I forgot the name. And that's what we have. So when we went there with my students, we discovered through research, if we take off their heads, symbolically, not take off their heads, they do look like they're from Korea. And actually they were made in Korea. So they look like they're Chinese statues. So we were asking, is it African? Or is this, we've got statues from Korea and we've put African heads there? Is this how we should memorialize our cities? As a student, you have that license. And so challenging that to say, okay, so how do we remember as Africans? One of the rituals we do as Africans when we go to a graveyard, or we come from the graveyard, we pick a stone somewhere, we put it there, we make a monument which is more transient, and say, okay, yes, maybe we can do that. Or we can create a place where we can sacrifice animals or whatever, but not this. But in a business sense, it works maybe as a tourist monument. Okay, next one. So Zimbabwe is here. Zimbabwe is there. I just wanted to very quickly refer to landscape architecture as a profession. We are guided by the International Federation of Landscape Architects, and we have an African Landscape Network, ALN. Please, all architects, you are involved in making of public space and landscape, you can join there and register yourself there so that you're part of this community. But I wanted to use Prof. Chiez's presentation that there, with one dot there, symbolically meaning that maybe there might just be one landscape architect there in Zimbabwe. And then only about 12 of the 54 African countries have something that offers a program close to landscape architecture. So we're really in trouble in terms of landscape architecture profession. In trouble, but also shows you, I think, as an architects institute, shows you where the focus should be of growth, that you need to ask those three universities, let's set up one program that speaks to landscape architecture programs. Okay, next one. And this is one of our colleagues who's been the chairperson of IFLA Africa, International Federation of Landscape Architects in IFLA. He's been driving the vision. We have a convention. Next one. Next one. We have an African Landscape Convention. You'll find it all online there. And it describes what landscape architecture is and how it's thinking for the future to address the challenge of 1 billion Africans in urban area. Blessings, next one. And so, in the open spaces or public spaces, landscape architects can act to reduce the urban heat island effect. So we're speaking the same language with NAPS. Capture snow and store excess CO2, capture, store, reuse water, existing local law impacts the building, provide food, urban agriculture. That's so important for the future of Africa. Next one. Public space. I would like each one of you maybe to take away just two things. Public space is about social and spatial justice in Africa. Social and spatial justice in that if every African has access to a public space, that means access to the city, then we have a just society. Public space is an integral part of the urban infrastructure that needs to be planned, designed, financed, and maintained to be sustainable. So we need to plan for it. It has to be part of the urban vision for the year 2100. Next one. Some of you might want to read more. I've written some of the things. This is one of my latest publications. Next one. Yeah. And from my side, thank you for the opportunity. I'm really looking forward to have a great learning discussion. And as I say in Kiswahili, asanteni sana. Zikomo kwambiri, and be blessed. Thank you.